I have a great pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. Rogers. I'm sorry, I mean Mr. Ken Beddell. You'll see why I call him Mr. Rogers. Dr. Beddell is ordained in the United Methodist Church. He led congregation for 16 years in New York, Maryland, and Ohio. He has taught at the junior high, high school, college, and theological school levels. As a volunteer with the Mennonite Central Committee, he taught high school in Swaziland. It's not Switzerland, as I thought. It's Swaziland, it's an African country. And he corrected me, thank you. In his capacity as Executive Secretary of the International Association for Methodist Schools, Colleges, and Universities, Ken visited schools and colleges in Argentina, Brazil, Korea, Mozambique, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. He is the author of 5 books and numerous articles and scholarly papers. His book entitled Different Ships, Same Boat on Ethics was published by the World Association of Christian Communication. For 5 years, he edited the annual yearbook of American and Canadian churches for the National Council of Churches. After receiving his PhD in sociology, he became active in the Religious Research Association, where he served on the executive committee. As an early promoter of the use of technology in educational systems and churches, he was the founding president of Church Computer User Network in the mid-'80s. He is married to the former Catherine Hale. They have 2 grown daughters, Charity Pelletier and Sarah Cook, and they have 5 grandchildren. And without any further ado, Dr. Beddell, please grace us with your presence.
What an honor it is to share with you this evening a celebration that's introduced as a time to remember and celebrate the work that was done in the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge. Dr. Abdel El-Aziz, he told me I was going to mess up his name, and now it makes me so angry when I did. El-Sadiq has been just so supportive of our attempts to make sure that we include a broad spectrum of groups, and the leadership that Dr. Stephen Timmermans has given to this program as well is an example that's important across the whole country. And in fact, I expect, it hasn't been released yet, but I expect that it's going to be lifted up in a special report that the White House is going to make. Well, I say it's exciting to be here also because of the theme that education is the solution. Now, I suppose that you might immediately say, well, it's the solution to what? And maybe you each have your own answer to that. But President Obama had an answer to that he has given in speeches to the joint sessions of Congress, that he's given when he's talked at the speeches that he gives for the State of the Union, and when he speaks to other groups. And that is that education is the solution to the future for America that is prosperous, but more than that, a future for America that brings prosperity and moral leadership to a global community. Education is not just learning how to read and write and the STEM subjects, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If it's only that, then the education that is a solution has failed us and has failed America. When we say education is the solution, we're also talking about an education that includes helping students and the communities that they live in be able to share in talking with each other across culturally, in understanding both differences and similarities, and in being empathetic across cultures. So today, it's exciting for me to be able to share with Mas and ICNA, Trinity Christian College, the Arab Spring for Syria, and Bridges in the specific project that we're talking about. But I would just like to remind you that this is not only something that's happening here, but it's part of a broader movement across the whole country. When President Obama sent out a challenge for institutions to participate in his President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge, there were at first 400 college presidents who said, oh, yeah, that's something we really should be working on, and we are working in. And then the people in the White House put together a structure for a planning document. And 270 of those institutions last summer went through a rigorous process of organizing and planning, and then during the past year, implementing that work. Those 270 institutions included 180 liberal arts colleges, 40 research institutions, 25 historically black institutions, 11 Hispanic serving institutions, 11 community colleges, 4 technical colleges. It was the broad spectrum of American higher education. Collectively, these institutions had partnerships on the campuses of things like the Muslim Student Association and the InterVarsity Christian Association, partnerships with 2,099 organizations. And in addition to that, these 270 schools formed partnerships with 654 outside organizations, beyond their community organizations, beyond the campus. They held programs that included a whole range of things from having lecture series, courses, book readings, film programs, as well as community projects that were things that were environmental, that were working with schools, that were working specifically on community coming together in interfaith programs. So as we celebrate this kind of incredible movement that's not only a movement here, but is part of a larger movement, I'd like to take a moment to challenge each one of you to think about how you can work to expand this project, as well as the kind of expansion that's happening through the work that you're doing here. How many of you know a college president or administrator that you might tell the story of what's possible and to encourage them to take up participation in the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge? Or know of an imam or a rabbi or a pastor who is a college chaplain that might not have taken the initiative to participate in the program, or even a student that is at a college that you can share the story that you're hearing tonight and say, well, maybe your school might want to pick this up and to be part of what's happening. But I want to go back to what this has meant for each one of the schools that's been part of the program, because I'm reminded as I see my friend from the Arab Spring of Syria, and as I'm thinking about what it means that we've seen the murder of 6 people simply because of confusion about what it means to be an American, and now the word that there's a serious investigation of arson at a mosque in Joplin, Missouri. and we're surrounded by this violence, that the programs that we've been talking about in the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge can be superficial if we allow them to be superficial. Or they can be a time when there is serious discussion about our faith and our beliefs, and a discussion, I would argue that we need to have discussion about violence. What is it that from our faith tradition speaks to our hearts about violence? Why is it that we would not just condemn the violence of others, but would look towards avoiding and not participating in violence in our own lives? That the programs need to make sure that we talk honestly and deeply when we come together as interfaith partners. I guess I have, what I prepared as my concluding paragraph was to point out that as we're thinking about education, and education being the solution, that education has to include the education that will make us a nation where we're committed to not just interfaith dialogue, but a depth of interfaith dialogue where the issues, like the issues of violence, are part of what we share and what we bring to that discussion. And that if we do that, if we do that, we can be part of making an America that is the kind of America where we know that violence is not tolerated, and that certainly violence that is based on some kind of misunderstanding, miscomprehension about faith is completely unacceptable in our nation and around the globe. I said I was going to stop there. I think can I have a couple more seconds? I'd like to not just make the argument that we need to take our discussion of violence seriously, but I'd like to share quickly my own understanding of what that means from my faith perspective. And then I'd like to just take 2 minutes and ask you to say to someone here what your understanding of your faith means as you think about violence and violence in America. I grew up, first of all, very much influenced by the idea that you had to kind of decide when violence was all right and when it wasn't. Christians understand that as the just war theory, and that's what, and that had been what I kind of came to, and that was the attitude that I had. I grew up in the time of the Vietnam War, and I just thought the war was wrong, that was wrong. Later I came to learn about a Christian tradition that's called Anabaptist, that says that Jesus Christ went to the cross in a non-violent way to bring the presence of God into the world in a violent world, and suffered that violence, and that we're called to sometimes suffer violence because we live in a world with violence, and we know that it's not of God and not to live that way. More recently, I've come under the influence of another Christian teaching that the Quakers, sometimes they're called the Friends, have, and they've pointed out that there is a piece of God in every single person, that God is present everywhere and in each person. And so if you would think about violence, you have to think about that person as being a child of God. And so that you could never participate in violence unless you could see that person as not being a child of God. And And so each time you must look at that. And that's where I see the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge as being the place where we begin to see that God is in everyone as we work together, as we're part of not only interfaith dialogue, but we're also part of service and working together to make the world a better place. So let me pause and just ask you to just say a couple of sentences, pair off, just turn around to someone and tell them about what your faith says about your understanding of violence and violence in our country. I know we have a lot of program, and maybe you can pick that up if there's later during dinner, but I just want to close with again thanking Moss and ICNA, Trinity, and Arab Spring for Syria and Bridges for the wonderful work and for this wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Beddell. From the perspective of a teacher, I also want to thank you. Well, what you guys just did is called Think, Pair, Share. And the idea behind it is to get the whole audience kind of talking and not just to have us up here speaking and you guys listening, but to engage in the conversation as well. So I salute you for that. And I thought I'd just quickly share like my experience. 9/11, I was in 7th grade, it was my first year going to a Muslim school, and I was so confused when it happened. Our school was shut down for like 5 days, and I was really confused about my own faith as well. I'm like, well, what does it say about violence? And one of the things that I learned that I carry with me is that in the Quran and in Islam it says, if you kill one human being, it's as if you've killed all of humanity. And if you save one human being, it's as if you've saved all of humanity. And I think that's something that we can reflect on and engage in. It's so similar to what you've learned about the Quakers, and I work with Quakers, and they're some of the most amazing people on earth. And so I just thought I would add that to say that's my own experience.